In May 2011, what should have been a dream honeymoon aboard the Ocean Mirage became a chilling mystery that would haunt investigators for years. The disappearance of 27-year-old Lillian Carter sent shockwaves through the cruise industry, exposing the dark truth behind her marriage to Brandon Carter, a 32-year-old Miami attorney with secrets buried beneath his carefully polished facade. Their wedding, a lavish December 2010 affair, had been an illusion of perfection. Beneath the surface, deceit and betrayal had already begun to fester. 4 days into their honeymoon, the illusion shattered. On the morning of May 10, 2011, the Ocean Mirage glided through the calm Caribbean waters en route to St. Thomas. While passengers enjoyed their breakfast under the sun, Suite 7419 remained eerily silent. At 8 a.m., a cabin attendant made his rounds, inspecting the usual remnants of a honeymoon: scattered luggage, empty champagne flutes, the lingering scent of sunscreen. But as he knocked on the door of Suite 7019, he was met with nothing but silence. Another knock, harder this time. Still nothing. Checking his log, he noted the names: Mr. and Ms. Carter. He had seen them on their first day. An elegant young couple, though whispers among the crew hinted at trouble. Their arguments had become a nightly occurrence. At 8:05 a.m., with no response, the attendant hesitated before swiping his keycard. The door clicked open, and he stepped inside, only to stop cold. The room was in disarray, the bed untouched, a woman's sandals overturned by the entrance, a half-filled glass of water abandoned on the nightstand. But it was the trail of bloody footprints leading from the bathroom to the balcony that made his stomach twist. The bathroom sink was smeared with reddish streaks, as though someone had tried, unsuccessfully, to wash away the evidence. The sliding door to the balcony was open, the curtains rippling in the morning breeze. The attendant stumbled back into the hallway, his pulse hammering. He had worked on cruise ships for years, had seen drunken brawls, medical emergencies, even the occasional tragedy. But nothing like this. The cabin attendant's pulse pounded in his ears as he sprinted down the hallway, searching for the nearest security officer. Within minutes, 3 members of the ship's security team arrived at Suite 7419. Their radios crackled with tense, fragmented chatter as they swept through the room, eyes scanning every detail. One officer stepped onto the balcony, gripping the railing as he peered over the edge. The ocean stretched endlessly below, silent, vast, and empty. There was no sign of anyone. At 8:45 a.m., the ship's loudspeakers crackled to life, cutting through the casual hum of breakfast conversations and distant music. Attention! Passenger Lillian Carter is missing. If anyone has seen her, please report to the security station immediately. A wave of unease rolled through the passengers. Silverware clattered onto plates. Conversations dropped into hushed whispers. People glanced around, scanning faces, searching for reassurance that no one could give. The Ocean Mirage carried thousands of passengers, but now one of them had vanished. Security mobilized quickly. Officers combed through hallways, restaurants, and open decks. Alerts with Lillian Carter's photo, pulled from the ship's database, were printed and distributed. Her husband, Brandon Carter, was located in the main dining area, sitting alone. He sipped black coffee, his expression unreadable. At 9:15 a.m., security officers approached cautiously, asking when he had last seen his wife. Brandon barely looked up. His voice was steady, rehearsed. He told them they had gone to bed late the night before. The last time he saw her, around 1:30 a.m., she had mentioned stepping out for some air before turning in for the night. He assumed she had come back while he was sleeping. When he woke at 6, she was gone. The officers noted the small details. His shirt was rumpled, creased in a way that suggested a restless night. His wedding ring stayed on his finger, but he kept twisting it absent-mindedly. His hand raked through his hair over and over. He repeated the same phrase, "I don't understand what's happening." But each time his voice grew thinner. As the questions deepened, so did the cracks in his story. When asked what Lillian was wearing the last time he saw her, he hesitated. When pressed about their final conversation, his answers wavered. Had they argued? He shrugged. It was a normal night, he insisted. By 10 a.m., the captain was notified. The U.S. Coast Guard was contacted. There was no security footage of Lillian leaving the ship, no records of her disembarking. Only one grim possibility remained. She had gone overboard. At 12:30 p.m., the rescue operation began. Search and rescue boats deployed, skimming the water surface, scanning the endless, unforgiving blue. The Ocean Mirage had sailed through the night, putting miles between itself and the spot where Lillian Carter was last seen. The open sea stretched endlessly in every direction, swallowing anything that fell into its depths. The odds of finding her alive after hours adrift in the vast, unforgiving waters were nearly non-existent. Still, the search continued. By May 12, 2011, 48 hours after she vanished, hope had all but disappeared. What began as a missing persons case was now an active criminal investigation. The FBI was called in. The tone aboard the ship shifted from hushed curiosity to something heavier: fear. What had first seemed like a tragic accident became the subject of whispered conversations in corridors, uneasy glances over dinner tables, and speculation behind closed cabin doors. Passengers recalled strange details. Some swore they had seen Lillian drinking alone the night before, her expression distant. Others reported a heated argument between her and Brandon near the casino bar. It was no longer a question of whether she had fallen. The real question was, had someone pushed her? As FBI agents conducted interviews, a disturbing portrait of Lillian's final days emerged. She wasn't simply a newlywed enjoying a dream honeymoon. She was a woman carrying a growing, silent fear. On her last night alive, she had argued with the only person who could tell the truth about what happened to her. Did she fall? Did she jump? Or was the truth far worse? Lillian Carter had always been the kind of person who filled a room with her energy. She made people feel welcome, her laughter infectious, her presence magnetic. In event planning, she had built a career out of creating joy for others, turning ordinary moments into something unforgettable. Brandon Carter was the opposite: calculated, measured, a man whose confidence was a weapon he wielded with precision. As a Miami attorney, he had built his success on persuasion, knowing how to bend the truth to fit his needs. His charm had drawn Lillian in, and for a time she believed in their love story. Everything between them moved quickly, too quickly. In December 2010, in front of family and friends at a lavish holiday party, Brandon slipped a 2-carat diamond ring onto Lillian's finger. She had said yes, convinced that what they had was real. By May 2011, the Ocean Mirage awaited Lillian and Brandon Carter for the honeymoon they had meticulously planned. A 7-day escape, a chance to celebrate the beginning of their new life together. The itinerary was picture perfect: Bahamas, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. Destinations where the ocean stretched endlessly, the sunsets burned gold and crimson, and love was meant to flourish. But in just 4 days, the illusion began to shatter. At first, the tension was barely noticeable, the kind of strain only those paying close attention could detect. By May 7, 2011, 3 days after boarding, passengers began whispering about them. Lillian still smiled, still carried on conversations, but something in her had dimmed. The ship's staff noticed it too: the hesitation before sitting beside Brandon at dinner, the way she stiffened under his touch, the way she seemed to shrink into herself. That night, in the dim glow of the Moonlight Casino, the first undeniable crack appeared. Laughter and cheers surrounded the roulette table, the carefree energy of a vacation in full swing. Lillian and Brandon stood among the crowd, seemingly just another couple enjoying the night. Then something shifted. A quiet exchange between them turned sharp. Those nearby saw the change first in Brandon, his amusement fading, his expression darkening. Then, without warning, Lillian's hand snapped up and struck him across the face. The sharp crack cut through the music. Gasps, stares. Brandon stood motionless, jaw clenched, fists curled at his sides. And then, in an instant, he smiled, a tight, practiced smile, leaned in and whispered something into her ear. Lillian's face drained of color. Her eyes shimmered, not with anger, but with something closer to fear. She turned and walked away, not looking back. By May 8th, Lillian was seen drinking alone at the Sunset Bar, gazing out at the endless ocean. She sat there for hours, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass, lost in thought. Several passengers approached her, asking if she was all right. She smiled, nodded, but the sadness in her face never left. By then, rumors had spread. Couples argued. That was normal. But there was something different about the Carters. Their fights weren't fleeting disagreements. They were something heavier, something dangerous. May 9th, 2011 was Lillian's last night. The VIP lounge buzzed with life. Couples danced, glasses clinked, conversations melted into the hum of waves crashing below. Amid the crowd, 25-year-old Isabel Romero, a passenger from Argentina, noticed something strange. Brandon was at the bar, but he wasn't alone. A woman younger, wearing a dress that clung to her frame, stood close, too close. Their bodies leaned toward each other, their conversation intimate. Brandon's hand lingered on the small of her back. He whispered something, and she laughed, brushing his arm. They weren't two strangers making small talk. They were something else, and Lillian saw everything. Somewhere in the crowd, she watched them. At first, her face betrayed nothing, but then her posture shifted. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers curled around the strap of her purse, knuckles white. No one knew it yet, but by morning, she would be gone. By the time the Ocean Mirage arrived in St. Thomas, there was no trace of her. The cruise meant to celebrate love had curdled into something sinister. The crew whispered about the missing woman, passengers swapped theories in hushed voices, and investigators worked to reconstruct the final hours before she disappeared. Lillian Carter had boarded the Ocean Mirage as a newlywed, a woman with a future stretching ahead of her like the endless horizon. It had taken just 4 days for that dream to unravel into something much darker. By May 14th, 2011, the glamour of the cruise had dissolved. The soft lounge music playing in the hallways now felt eerie, a hollow echo of the trip's original promise. Staff who once carried trays of cocktails now spoke in low voices, their eyes shifting toward the lower decks, where investigators combed through every detail of her last moments. The passengers, once eager for sun and luxury, now avoided certain hallways, as if proximity to the investigation would pull them into its gravity. Lillian Carter was no longer just a missing woman. She was the center of something far more disturbing. The FBI took control of the case, scouring every second of security footage. Somewhere in the ship's endless corridors, in the maze of decks and rooms, the truth was recorded. They just had to find it. At 12:47 a.m. on May 10, 2011, a camera above the infinity pool captured something unsettling. Lillian and Brandon stood near the water's edge. In Lillian's hand was a delicate silver necklace. Her posture was rigid, her gestures sharp, her distress unmistakable. Brandon stood a few steps away, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Some passengers were still awake, lingering at the bar, finishing the night's last drinks. Later, a few would recall Lillian's trembling hands, the tension in her voice, not the words, just the weight behind them. A frustration barely contained. At 1:02 a.m., Lillian turned and left the pool, walking quickly, shoulders stiff with restrained emotion. 1 minute later, Brandon followed, but his pace was different, measured, controlled, deliberate. The security footage captured the contrast between them in a way that felt almost unnatural. One person consumed by raw emotion, the other moving with an eerie precision. At 1:29 a.m., the door to Suite 7419 opened. The hallway camera recorded a shadowed figure stepping onto the balcony. But the poor lighting, the movement of the curtains in the night breeze, obscured the details. It was impossible to tell if it was Lillian or Brandon. For several seconds, the figure stood motionless. Then, at 1:36 a.m., the sliding balcony door closed. That was the last time anyone saw Lillian Carter. By May 16, 2011, the search had expanded far beyond the ship. The U.S. Coast Guard had scanned miles of open ocean. Not a single trace of her was found. And soon the question was no longer where she had gone. It was how she had disappeared. Authorities shifted their focus to Suite 7419. At first glance, the room appeared untouched. The bed was neatly made, luggage set undisturbed, and the curtains were drawn open, framing the vast, indifferent ocean. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. A closer examination revealed details that didn't belong. Small blood stains near the balcony railing, too little to suggest a brutal struggle, but enough to raise an unsettling question. Had Lillian been hurt before she vanished? Or had someone tried to erase something far worse? Then came the discovery that changed everything. Hotel records showed that between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., someone had removed the bedsheets. No housekeeping staff had entered the room. There was no reason for them to be missing. Someone had taken them. The question was why. As investigators pieced together that night's events, another chilling revelation surfaced. Inside Lillian's purse, carefully folded in a side pocket, they found a small handwritten note, dated May 8, 2011, just 2 days before she disappeared. It contained a message in her distinct handwriting. "If anything happens to me, tell my sister. Gina was right. Tell her I found out the truth about Brandon. Tell her I knew everything." The investigation had changed. This was no longer a case of a missing woman. This was a homicide. As detectives pulled apart Brandon Carter's carefully crafted image, the illusion of a devastated husband began to collapse. In the days following Lillian's disappearance, he had played the part of a grieving spouse perfectly. His statements were measured, his tone composed. He insisted he had no idea what had happened, that he had simply gone to bed expecting to wake up beside his wife. But his phone records told a different story. Multiple late-night calls to a woman named Amanda Langley, a 28-year-old legal assistant from his Miami law firm. At first, Amanda claimed their relationship was strictly professional. Emails, casework, nothing more. Then investigators checked the Ocean Mirage's passenger list. Amanda's name was there. She had booked a solo cruise the same week Brandon and Lillian were on their honeymoon. A coincidence, Amanda said. But the FBI didn't believe in coincidences. And then, the final revelation. 4 months before their wedding, Brandon had taken out a $1.5 million life insurance policy in Lillian's name. He was the sole beneficiary. For a young, healthy woman with no history of illness, such a large policy was unusual. But the fact that it only benefited her husband, that was something else entirely. Investigators had reached a chilling conclusion. Lillian Carter hadn't just vanished, she had been erased. The betrayal, the arguments, the missing bed sheets, the note in her purse, it all painted a picture far more sinister than a tragic accident. Lillian had discovered Brandon's affair just days before her disappearance. She had confronted him, felt the weight of her humiliation, and realized that her marriage was a lie. And now she was gone. By May 20th, 2011, the illusion of Brandon Carter's innocence had completely collapsed. The evidence against him was no longer just circumstantial. It was damning. The missing sheets in Suite 7419, the incriminating phone records, the carefully constructed alibi that crumbled under scrutiny. There was no more room for denial. Brandon Carter was arrested in Miami and charged with first-degree murder. His trial began in March 2012. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, former colleagues, and onlookers eager to witness the downfall of a man who had once seemed untouchable. The prosecution laid out a methodical, brutal timeline: betrayal, confrontation, murder, and a desperate cover-up. Lillian had confronted Brandon on the night of May 9, 2011. She had threatened to leave him, to expose him. Brandon, a man used to control, panicked. He couldn't afford a scandal. He couldn't afford to lose everything. Something inside him snapped. The evidence told the rest of the story. A violent struggle inside Suite 7419. The missing sheets, likely used to dispose of her body. The security footage showing Lillian heading toward their room, followed by her husband's slow, deliberate steps just minutes later. And then nothing. The prosecution argued that between 1:36 a.m. and 3:00 a.m., Brandon wrapped Lillian's lifeless body in the missing sheets and carried her onto the balcony. He waited until the decks were empty, then lifted her over the railing and let go. The vast, endless ocean swallowed her whole. No witnesses, no remains, just silence. On March 28, 2012, after only 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty. Brandon Carter was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Amanda Langley was never charged, but her life was destroyed. Her affair with a married man who became a murderer was enough to ruin her career, her reputation, and any chance of disappearing into anonymity. Despite Brandon's conviction, Lillian Carter was never found. The ocean had claimed her. Her honeymoon had become her grave. The Ocean Mirage continued its voyages, but it would never escape the shadow of what had happened on Deck 7. Lillian Carter's disappearance became more than just a mystery. It became a whisper that never faded. The staff spoke of her in hushed voices, never fully burying the story. Passengers who boarded the ship in the years after her disappearance heard fragments of the tale, passed along over cocktails and candlelit dinners. Some claim that late at night, When the sea was eerily still, the air turned unnaturally cold. Others murmured about a figure near the balcony of Suite 7419, standing motionless, staring out at the endless water. Lillian's family never stopped searching for answers. Her sister, Gina Carter, turned her grief into a relentless crusade, exposing the hidden dangers of cruise ships and demanding justice for those who had vanished at sea. Her fight led to industry-wide changes: tighter security, stricter protocols, mandatory reporting of missing persons. But no law, no regulation, no corporate reform could undo what had been done. Lillian was gone. Brandon Carter, once a man with everything, spent the rest of his life behind bars. From his prison cell, he never stopped claiming his innocence. He insisted that Lillian had left on her own, that she had abandoned him, that the world had been too eager to believe in his guilt. But the evidence was undeniable. The missing sheets, the affair, the life insurance policy, the lies that unraveled the moment the FBI looked closer. Lillian Carter's honeymoon had never been a celebration of love. It had been a carefully laid trap, one she never escaped. Her case became one of the most infamous crimes in cruise ship history. Documentaries dissected every moment, every frame of security footage, every whisper of evidence, reconstructing the final hours of a woman who had unknowingly stepped onto a ship that would become her grave. Each retelling added a new theory, a new question, but the truth remained locked between two people, one rotting in a prison cell and one lost to the sea. Years passed, but Lillian was never forgotten. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, her family gathered by the shore, lighting candles and casting flowers into the waves. They stood in silence, watching as the ocean swallowed their offerings, as if waiting for some sign that she was still there, somewhere, drifting just beneath the surface. Gina Carter never stopped fighting. She appeared on television, stood before lawmakers, and became the voice for those who had vanished without justice. Because for her, the case was never truly closed. Brandon Carter appealed his conviction again and again, every time he was denied. Every time the world reminded him that it had already made its decision. He tried to rebuild his image, writing letters from his cell, insisting that Lillian had chosen to disappear. But the world didn't believe him. Over time, Brandon Carter faded from the headlines, becoming just another name on the long list of convicted murderers condemned to die in a prison cell. His letters, filled with desperate pleas of innocence, were sent to journalists, but no one believed him. His former colleagues erased him from memory, his name removed from firm directories as if he had never existed. Even his own family severed all ties. As for Amanda Langley, she disappeared from public view the moment the trial ended. Fired from her job, she packed up her life and fled the state, trying to bury the scandal that had destroyed her. She never spoke of the case again. In time, her name became nothing more than a footnote in the tragedy of Lillian Carter. The Ocean Mirage continued to sail, but for those who knew the truth about Suite 7419, the ship was forever tainted. New crew members whispered about what had happened, learning the story from those who had been there. The suite where Lillian had spent her last night remained a place of unease. Some avoided it altogether. Others swore they felt something shift in the air when passing by, a sensation of being watched, an inexplicable chill creeping down their spine. Doors slammed shut without reason. Lights flickered in empty hallways. People dismissed it as imagination, as superstition. But the weight of what had happened there was inescapable. As time passed, the case lost its grip on the public's attention. New crimes took over the headlines. New tragedies fed the endless appetite for horror. Lillian Carter's name, once the center of relentless media coverage, became just another archived case file, forgotten by all but those who had truly known her. But for Gina Carter, the story never faded. The fight never ended. Every wave that crashed against the shore was a reminder of her sister, of what had been taken, of the emptiness left behind. It was also a reminder of Lillian's strength, her defiance, her desperate attempt to uncover the truth before it was too late. The ocean had swallowed Lillian Carter. It had erased her body, but not her story. And for those who remembered, who stood on the shore and listened to the rhythmic crash of the waves, it was impossible not to wonder, somewhere in the depths, did some trace of her still remain? Did the sea carry with it the last echoes of her voice? The world moved on, but the truth would never be silenced. Years passed, but Lillian Carter's name never truly disappeared. It lingered in investigative reports, in quiet conversations, in the memories of those who refused to let her story be buried. Travelers who boarded the Ocean Mirage after the tragedy often heard whispers of what had happened. A cautionary tale passed between passengers in hushed voices, a story retold in dimly lit hallways. Some dismissed it as rumor. Others felt an unease they couldn't explain, an invisible weight pressing against the walls of Suite 70419. The cruise line did what it could to erase the stain, remodeling decks, renaming suites, redesigning brochures to present an illusion of untouched luxury. But those who knew the truth understood. No amount of fresh paint could hide what had happened there. For Gina Carter, the years did nothing to dull the fight. While the world moved on, she remained relentless. She became a voice for those who had disappeared at sea, an advocate for victims whose names would otherwise vanish beneath the waves. She spoke at legal summits, at victim advocacy events, at press conferences, demanding justice that could never come soon enough. Every speech, every interview, every battle fought in her sister's name was a refusal to let Lillian become just another statistic. Her life had mattered. Her story would not be forgotten. Brandon Carter spent decades behind bars, a man who had once had everything, now reduced to nothing. His name became a case study in law schools, an episode in true crime documentaries, a subject of endless debate among those desperate to dissect every last detail. But for all the theories, for all the analysis, one fact remained unshaken. On the night of May 10, 2011, Lillian Carter had vanished, swallowed by the vast and merciless ocean. The world moved forward. New scandals filled the headlines. The Ocean Mirage continued to sail. But there are stories that refuse to die, tragedies that refuse to fade. Lillian Carter's body was never found, her final moments lost to the dark waters. Yet for those who had loved her, her presence could never truly disappear. Some wounds never close. Some absences can never be filled. In some stories, no matter how deep they are buried, refuse to be forgotten.